As we head into September, let's recap the growing season of 2021. Good morning. We are here at the Garden of Eden, and I have just finished planting it. It is what is today? May 22nd, which is the earliest I've ever planted a vegetable garden. But the weather has been warm, and I just want to do a little video diary of what I have and where I have it so I can remember. I've tried a few new things this year. So this is my eggplant bed. I have rotated my crops. They were to the left of the garden when you walked in before. Now they're to the right. And I planted black beauties this year and the Japanese kind. Last year I just did the Japanese kind. And then, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 plants. So hopefully I'll get a decent amount of eggplant from that. Then I have some sunflowers in the corner. I'm hoping to have a sunflower grow up this side. I have microgreens planted here. Then this bed is my tomato plant, and I've decided to plant less tomatoes this year after last year was just so hard to manage. I have a few more than I wanted, but they came in a 6-pack. So I have 4 yellow tomatoes, and then I have 2 heirlooms in this first bed. And then in the front and the back of each bed, I've planted herbs. Some have come up on their own, and some I've planted from seed. Then in front here, I have not done nasturtiums like I did last year. This is just pumpkins. Mini pumpkins and regular jack-o'-lanterns, and I have them on hills. There's some cilantro just coming up on its own, so that's fine. That'll be gone before it starts, before the pumpkins grow. And then I planted some sunflower seeds on the back here, hoping that they will come up against the fence. Then in the back corner here, I planted butternut squashes that I'm going to try to trellis up. Oh, I just remembered. I think I planted gourds here instead of pumpkins. I planted one kind of gourd here and one kind of gourd here so that they can trellis up. Totally forgot about that. So it isn't just pumpkins. This is a butternut, a baby butternut, which I'll hopefully trellis up. And then this is my asparagus, year 2, so I didn't pick it again. There might have been a couple that I could have harvested, but I decided just to let them go to seed and do what asparagus is supposed to do. And I guess 3rd year, you're supposed to be able to eat it. And because I'm not harvesting it, I planted in between here some nasturtiums and flowers, hoping that as these die off, there'll be something here to look at. Then this is my cauliflower and broccoli, and I know how big they get, so 4 will be enough. And then I had planted 3 lettuce in here and a kale, but one of them got eaten already. So what I ended up doing is planting bok choy with seeds in here. So we'll see if that comes up. Never grown bok choy before, so fingers crossed. And then this is my pea bed, which the peas have already come up, the seedlings, but not all of them germinated. So we'll see how many actually pop up. But I've planted nasturtiums here because when the peas are ready to be pulled down, hopefully the nasturtiums will come up and take over this whole bed. And then this is my zucchini. I have 4 mounds of zucchini seeds planted, and then I have 1 yellow squash. And again, I planted sunflowers on the edge here to come up. And I have my curly kale planted here, and I planted some flower in the back there too, but I can't remember what it is right now. It could be sunflowers, but I don't think so because it's such a shallow. I can't remember what I planted there. I guess we'll find out when they pop up, if they pop up. And then dill is coming up on its own here, and that's a pretty tall plant, so we'll leave that. I'll probably cluster it once it gets a little older. I have cucumbers here, and then I have 2 pear yellow tomatoes here, so the little tiny ones. And in between, I planted seeds. What did I plant here? Oh, I planted all herbs in the middle. Sage and rosemary, and we'll see what ends up coming up, but I figured just in the middle, having some herbs there would be good. And I think I planted some lavender over here. We'll see if the seeds. I've never done herbs from seed like that, not sage and lavender, so we'll find out. Last year, my pepper patch was way too big. We didn't use them all. I have hot peppers dried for years. I don't need any more hot peppers. So I have one jalapeno for margaritas, one serrano because I love making salsa with serranos, and an orange bell, which in all honesty, I hate bell peppers, but I thought I was buying 2 serranos and somehow an orange bell got in my cart rather than a serrano. So it is what it is. And then in this area in between here and more cucumbers, I planted all flower seeds so that I can have some cut flowers. I really didn't have a lot of flowers in my garden last year, and this year I want to try to increase that. And then I have a small plot with string beans. Everybody in my house says they don't like string beans, but they've never had fresh string beans, so I'm gonna give them a try. And I also planted some flowers in this bed too because green beans are early. So that's a lot. This is all planted and ready, and I will just be watering it and weeding it, and hopefully before we know it, it will be lush and green, and I'm hoping the seeds take root. That's always the worry. Seedlings are one thing when you buy them from the nursery, but when you get seeds, it's really just a leap of faith. So this is the video. This is my garden on May 22nd. And before I know it, it'll look like this. And here we are 3 months later. Well, this was not my banner year. The rain was unbelievable this year, the wettest on record in New Hampshire. And as a result, I had a lot of blight, a lot of rot, and a lot of yellow vegetables. Now, those tomatoes are supposed to be yellow, but my cucumbers weren't supposed to be yellow, and they were yellow. A lot of my leaves turned yellow, and a lot of my vegetables had yellow tint. And I think that's just the amount of water that we had. My tomatoes were so sad this year. You know, last year I could barely contain them, so we built these beautiful wooden structures this year, and they didn't even barely get past the half rung. Yep, there's 8 eggplant plants down there, none of which have bore fruit. And my sunflower, well, it did grow and grow and grow. 15 feet of growth, to be exact. Maybe one of the only successes in this garden this year. Another plant I really enjoyed was this plant called a love-a-puff, which is a very strange little plant that has these little lanterns, and when the lanterns dry up, there's seeds that have little hearts on them, which is quite cute. It's a nice little interesting flower piece in my garden. I tried to plant a little bit more flowers and interest in my garden this year, and I'm glad I did because the vegetables did not provide what I thought they would this year. The nasturtium did come in after the peas. The peas, again, were a complete failure. Had to plant them twice. I had a lot of problems with pests this year. Rabbits and chipmunks, which ate the first set of peas, and then the second set of peas just didn't do well with the rain. And at least my nasturtiums are coming in. My asparagus is crazy big. This is year 2. I thought, as you saw in the beginning of the video, that this would die off for the rest of the summer. But no, it's been a jungle of asparagus the entire time, and now I have all these red berries that keep coming and dropping. And from what I heard, that's a good sign. But I don't need to plant anything here next year, as they seem to stick around, or the fronds seem to stick around all summer. Maybe that'll be different next year if I'm able to harvest and eat them. The baby butternut squash are so pint-sized, I guess you just put them on the grill. I certainly won't be coring them and using them for soup, but they're cute. And then I have my gourds are coming in. I have a few birdhouse gourds that are coming in. My pumpkins, not as many as I thought, but, you know, we'll still have a decent Halloween showing. And hopefully I will have a nice little display. I see a new pumpkin growing right there. I planted one jack-o'-lantern plant and a couple baby pumpkin plants, and the baby pumpkin plants have probably provided about a dozen little pumpkins, and I think I have 3 or 4 jack-o'-lanterns growing. But as you can see, the white powder mold, mildew, blight, whatever you want to call it, that's growing on my plants. It's pretty typical for this time of year, but I'm just finding with the rain, everything is really dying off a lot quicker than it did in last year. I was still getting a lot of greenery through October last year, and I'll be lucky if this garden lasts a few more weeks. This is another type of gourd I planted. My gourds, my zucchini plants, I had to plant 2, sometimes 3 times. Either the seeds were rotting or something was getting to the seeds, but I just couldn't seem to get anything planted from seed to come up on the first try. This sunflower is just bursting with flowers, and my pollinators are absolutely loving it. I'm so happy I planted flowers in this garden this year. I must have planted at least a dozen sunflowers, but I was only able to get 3 to actually germinate without getting taken by a pest. My dill is just coming in now, which is very late for dill, but it's doing pretty well. And again, you can see the color yellow. That's the theme of this year's garden. So because so many of my things died this year, I moved some ground cherries into my garden, which I'll talk more about in this video. They're absolutely one of my favorites, and they are at least doing well in the garden, and hopefully will reseed next year. The only flowers that came up from seed is this one marigold. All my other marigolds and other seeds were complete losers. I ended up having to go out and buy seedlings for my zinnias and for my cosmos because I just couldn't get anything to germinate. And if you can see my sad little tomatoes, I had huge tomatoes giving me fruit through October last year. Not so much this year. I have oregano coming in. I let them go to flower because I think the pollinators really like them, and I will never use that much oregano. Herbs did well this year. Herbs and flowers. Vegetables, not quite so much. Again, here's another one of my sunflowers. It's a multi-head stalk, so even though only 3 came up, I got a big bang for my buck. So that was... that's really good because sunflowers, to me, they're something that every year I look forward to having in my garden. They're a happy kind of a flower, and they attract birds and pollinators to your garden. Speaking of pollinators, I absolutely love watching bumblebees on the Love-A-Puff. The flowers are so tiny, and these big fat bumblebees somehow get their faces or they're right inside of them, and it just kind of cracks me up how they perch themselves on these itty-bitty flowers. I could just kind of sit and watch them all day. And here's on the outside of my garden, I have some pumpkins and gourds growing. You know, not too many this year, but that's okay. I still have a few left over from last year for bird houses, and I feel like this was a learning year. So all in all, if you take a peek, my garden wasn't a huge success like it was last year. Probably my most challenging gardening year between the rain and the pests. But, that's part of being a gardener. You're not always going to have a tip-top year. And I think my takeaways from this year is to plant flowers because if nothing else, you have pretty flowers you can take inside and your garden looks pretty. So I will probably increase that next year. And even though I don't generally do well doing seedlings ahead of time indoors, I'm definitely going to plant some sunflowers and flowers as seedlings probably in April indoors because this year, I don't know what happened. Either they didn't germinate or I was weeding them. So now the last little garden I want to show you is by my house, and it's around my pergola. It is called my kitchen garden, And here it is. So this was it in May, nice and tidy as you can see, and all my herbs, most of them had come back on their own. A lot of them are perennials at this point, and I just have to sort of keep the size down. And I ended up adding, a sage plant, a couple basil plants, and you'll see over here I added some cilantro. That was a little cilantro bed that got completely eaten by rabbits. And then a little tomatillo, some extra tomatoes that I had planted. And I always plant morning glories and ground cherries. But to be fair, they kind of plant themselves from the year before, and I just sort of contain them. That rogue onion that you see, I picked probably about a week after I did this video. So everything was fairly neat. I had a lot of expectation for this year and thought it was going to be a terrific growing year. And just like in my veggie garden, the veggies did not do so well, but the herbs are gangbusters. Here's some more ground cherries. You can see the yellow ones are about to drop, and that means I can take them indoors. My herbs are so big, and this whole bed was getting decimated by rabbits, so we put up a fence, which we don't usually have to do, which made it impossible for me to weed, and everything got so big that it is just a big jungle. And I've thrown up my hands and just going to get through the season and harvest whatever I can. These are tomatillos, a little bit small this year, really much smaller than I'm used to. Again, I think it has something to do with the weather and the rain. We've had so much rain and then extreme heat, and I think it's just not typical for this growing area, and I'm just not seeing results I usually see. I did get my morning glories to come up as usual, although there's a little less than there usually is. And I planted a little other things here and there just to make it pretty, but it is just a jungle. And just in case you're curious about ground cherries, they're like a paper lantern that comes off, and if you pick them too early, they'll be green, like on the left there, a little bit sour. But the yellow, the bright yellow there, you can eat those when the lanterns get paper thin and see-through like you just saw. They are delicious. And look at all my yellow tomatoes. I told you this is the year of yellow, and I have a yellow tomato sauce that is amazing. Again, yellow cucumbers, I just don't understand it, and half of them had that kind of like patchy look to it, and they just weren't even good. They go right into the compost. Again, just way too much water this year. But it is what it is. And this is my one pepper that I got, my sad little one bell pepper. It just really wasn't my year. So that is my Garden of Eatin 2021. I think I lost as many vegetables as I actually harvested this year. But as a gardener, that's just what you have to do. You have to do the best with what you have every year. And there's always hope for the next year that it's going to be an amazing growing season. So thanks for stopping by. I appreciate you looking into all of my losses and wins this year in the garden. Gardening is always an adventure. And until next year, sending my gardening love to you from the Garden of Eatin.